I want you to imagine a very simple moment. Nothing big or mysterious. Just a morning moment before the day begins, when everything is still quiet, not yet pulled by work responsibilities or familiar thoughts. In that moment, you do not need to answer anyone. You do not need to prove anything. You do not need to become a better version of yourself. You are simply there. And if you are quiet enough, you may notice something unusual. No matter how messy your life feels or how much pain you are carrying, there is something inside you that remains still. I have observed this throughout my life. People can panic. Thoughts can race without stopping. Emotions can change hour by hour. But beneath all of that, there is always a foundation that does not move. It is not loud. It does not try. It does not argue with reality. It simply exists. And this presence is what most of us forget as we grow older, as we carry more roles and more pressure. We often think peace is something we must earn, that we need to understand more, practice more, fix ourselves more before we deserve to touch it. But the truth is the opposite. Peace is not a reward for effort. It is the foundation of life itself. It was there before you ever began to worry. It does not come and go. What comes and goes is only your attention. I am not saying this as an idea for you to believe. I am saying it as something you can verify in everyday life. When you stop resisting the present moment, even when that moment is not comfortable, you will see that you are not broken in the way you imagined. There is something inside you strong enough to hold every emotion, every change, every unanswered question. This presence does not depend on whether you are living correctly or not. It does not react to your mistakes or your successes. It does not leave when you are tired or doubtful. It does not come closer when you beg, nor move away when you forget it. It is unchanging, and because it is unchanging, it is the only place you can truly rest. Many people place their sense of safety in external things: a relationship, a position, a plan, a certain future. But all of these can change. And when they do, people panic, not because of loss, but because they no longer know what they are standing on. I say this not to blame, but to point to another way. If you learn to return to this inner presence, not through effort, but through recognition, you will begin to feel a very different kind of stability. Not because your life has no problems, but because you are no longer carrying your entire life on the small shoulders of the ego. This is the beginning, not of a journey going outward, but of a return. And from this point, everything else can finally fall into its proper place. I want you to pause here for a moment and ask yourself something very simple. Over the past days, when was the last time you truly listened to the rhythm of life inside you? Not the rhythm of work schedules or obligations, but the deeper, slower rhythm that does not need effort in order to exist. There is a truth I learned not from books, but from watching people in the most difficult seasons of their lives. When everything outside becomes chaotic, when plans no longer work, when familiar roles begin to shake, people often believe they have lost their direction. But what they actually lose is not the path. It is their connection to the inner rhythm. You see, life does not operate through hurry. The universe is not rushed. Your heart does not need reminders to keep beating. Your breath does not need a schedule to move in and out. There is an intelligence quietly working all the time, with such precision that we only notice it when we stop interfering. When I speak about presence, I am not talking about a special feeling or a lofty state. I am talking about the foundation that keeps everything from falling apart, even when you believe you are falling apart. There is a steady rhythm supporting you even on days when you do not believe in yourself. And that rhythm does not need you to understand it. It only asks that you stop resisting. Many people have grown used to living in tension. They call it responsibility. They call it maturity. But prolonged tension is not a sign of a well-ordered life. It is a sign that you are trying to carry something beyond your true role. You were not born to control your entire life. You were born to live in cooperation with a greater order. When you listen to the inner rhythm, you begin to realize something important. You do not need to push everything for life to move forward. Sometimes the wisest thing is not to do more, but to pause long enough to hear what truly needs to be done. Presence never shouts. It whispers, and only those who are quiet enough can hear it. I have met many people who say they no longer feel anything inside. They say they feel empty, tired, numb. But that does not mean presence has disappeared. It only means they have lived on the noisy level for too long. Like a room with lights always on you, forget what natural light looks like. But it is still there waiting for you to open the window. Presence does not need your belief to exist. It does not need the correct name. It keeps working when you doubt. It keeps supporting you when you are afraid. And because of that, you can begin again at any moment. No conditions. No rituals. Just one honest moment with yourself. I want to ask you one question here, and you do not need to answer me. Only answer it for yourself. If today you stop trying to control everything, even for a brief moment, what do you think would happen? Would the world collapse? Or would there be a lightness you have forgotten for a very long time? You may be used to living in defense mode, always preparing for the worst, always thinking one step ahead to avoid being hurt. But constant defense disconnects you from the true rhythm of life. You live, but you do not touch life, and presence cannot be felt through armor. When you allow yourself to listen within, not to fix, but to understand, you will realize there has always been a quiet support that never left. It was there when you were strong. It is still there when you are weak. It does not judge good or bad seasons. It simply remains. And that loyalty is the true foundation of peace. If you are listening to this, I want to thank you. Not because you agree with me, but because you took the time to listen. In a world that constantly pushes you to be faster, stronger, more, choosing to stay with a slow story is already an act of courage. And before we continue, I want you to remember one thing. The inner rhythm of your life is not broken. It is simply waiting for you to return. There is an invisible burden that many people carry for years without realizing it. The feeling that you must become someone else for life to be better. You must understand more. You must be stronger. You must be more positive. You must finish healing before you are allowed to rest. That feeling quietly shapes the way you live each day. It makes you see yourself as an unfinished project, as a problem that needs fixing. And while you are trying to become someone else, you slowly move away from yourself. I have seen this repeat in many lives. Kind people, conscious people, responsible people, yet always tired. Not because they are lazy or incapable, but because they live with a constant sense of not enough. Not good enough. Not right enough. Not worthy enough of peace. They believe that once everything inside is fixed, once they reach a certain state, then they will finally be able to exhale. What they do not realize is that this very belief is what keeps them tense. The truth is very different from what we are often taught. You do not need to become a different person to touch peace. You do not need to climb a spiritual ladder. You do not need to complete yourself before you are allowed to rest. Peace is not at the end of the journey. It is at the foundation of life. And if you do not touch that foundation now, no matter how far you go, you will still carry a sense of lack. I want to say this very clearly. Presence is not a reward for those who do things right. It does not arrive when you meet a standard. It does not come when you control your thoughts or emotions. It was already there before you ever began trying to be better. And the only thing that covers it is not your mistakes or weaknesses, but the constant busyness of the mind. When you believe you must change in order to be at peace, you place conditions on life itself. You tell yourself this moment is not enough. This person is not enough. This life is not enough. And when you live with that belief, you are never truly where you are. You are always in the future, in another version of yourself, in a day when things will finally be better. But life does not happen there. It only happens here. There is something important I have learned. Real change does not begin by trying to become someone else. It begins by stopping the resistance to who you are right now. When you stop seeing yourself as a problem, something inside you begins to shift. When you stop forcing yourself to be better, a deeper intelligence begins to guide you. Not the intelligence of calculation, but the intelligence of life. You do not have to love everything about yourself right away. I am not asking you to pretend to be positive. I am only saying that you can stop treating yourself like an enemy. You can stop standing outside yourself, constantly watching, judging, correcting. Sometimes the most healing thing is not more analysis, but allowing yourself to be present as you are. No decoration, no justification, no escape. Many people are afraid to pause because they think if they stop trying, they will fall behind. But the truth is, when you stop trying in the wrong way, you begin to move in the right direction. Presence does not make you passive. It makes you clear. When you no longer spend energy fighting yourself, that energy naturally becomes available for living, for feeling, for acting in a more fitting way. I want you to look back at the moments in your life when you felt the most exhausted. Often, those were not the times you did the most, but the times you resisted reality the most. When you forced yourself to feel different, to think differently, to be stronger while you were already empty inside. Presence does not ask you to hide that emptiness. It only invites you to stop pretending. When you allow yourself to be still with yourself, even for a brief moment, you begin to notice that there is something within you that is not damaged by what you are going through. A part of you remains whole, remains steady, continues to breathe evenly no matter how chaotic things feel. And that part does not need fixing. It only needs to be remembered. We are used to living through effort. We are taught that only by trying do we deserve anything. But life does not operate through tension. It operates through alignment. When you stop forcing yourself to become someone, you begin to hear who you truly are. And from there, the changes that are needed come more naturally, with less pain, with less conflict. I am not asking you to believe anything I say. I am only inviting you to try something very small. In this moment, try to stop fixing yourself. Stop evaluating whether you are doing things right or wrong. Stop asking if you are good enough yet. Just be here. Just breathe. Just allow this moment to exist as it is. If you can do that, even for a few seconds, you will begin to understand what I am pointing to. Not through logic, but through direct experience. You will see that you do not need to go anywhere to touch the foundation of life. You have been standing on it from the beginning. Presence is not a destination. It is the beginning we quietly forgot. And when you remember this gently and naturally, your life begins to reorganize itself from the inside out. Not because you try harder, but because you stop being so hard on yourself. There is an image of God that many people have carried for their entire lives without ever questioning it. An image of an external power watching, evaluating, recording every mistake, and delivering outcomes based on behavior. This image settles deep into the subconscious. Even when people no longer follow a specific religion, they still live unconsciously, as if they are always being watched and graded. From that place, a quiet fear is born. Fear of being wrong. Fear of going off track. Fear of being abandoned. Fear that if they become weak for even a moment, the support will disappear. But when we look closely at how life actually functions, we begin to see something very different. The sun does not shine because humans deserve it. The heart does not beat because someone has done the right thing. Breath does not arrive because someone prayed well enough. The most basic aspects of life operate without conditions. And if physical life works this way, then the principle behind it cannot be a moody power reacting with judgment. The presence that Emmet Fox spoke about was never a moral character standing outside of humanity. It is a living principle, an intelligent order, a love that does not need proof. It is not activated by perfection, and it is not withdrawn because of mistakes. It does not reward the good and punish the bad in the way humans imagine. It is simply the foundation that allows everything to continue existing and moving. When people believe they live under a judging gaze, they begin to split themselves. One part tries to be correct while another carries the fear of being exposed as not enough. That inner division drains life energy. It creates constant tension, even when things look fine on the outside. People no longer live to live. They live to avoid being wrong. And in that state, peace cannot arise. If presence is love and order, then it cannot be in conflict with the life it sustains. It cannot be both the source of life and a threat to it. It cannot keep the heart beating while waiting to punish it for being tired. The truth is, the fear of judgment does not come from presence itself, but from a misunderstanding of it. When the image of God is corrected, many things inside begin to change. People no longer have to prove their worth. They begin to live more honestly with themselves. They allow weakness to appear without panic. They see mistakes as signals for adjustment rather than as sentences. And in that space, healing begins naturally. Presence does not react to you. It does not get angry when you are confused. It does not feel disappointed when you doubt. It does not turn away when you are exhausted. It stands still like a foundation, so that you can freely experience every state without fear of being dropped. Because it does not react, it is safe enough to rest on. Many people have spent their lives trying to please an imagined divine image. They beg when afraid. They make promises when desperate. They blame themselves when things do not work out. But presence does not need to be pleased. It does not require begging. It is not moved by promises. It operates by law, and law is not personal. Law does not favor or reject. Law only reflects. When someone understands that they live within a loving order rather than under a judging gaze, the mind begins to soften. The need for defense decreases. The pressure to always be right fades. And from there, clarity appears. Not the clarity of having all the answers, but the clarity of no longer being ruled by fear. This does not make people careless or irresponsible. On the contrary, when fear is no longer the driver, actions become more accurate. People correct themselves not out of shame, but out of understanding. They adjust their direction, not to avoid punishment, but to live in greater harmony with the order supporting them. Presence does not require you to be good in order to be loved. It loves first. And it is this unconditional love that creates the real possibility of change. When someone feels safe at the deepest level, they do not need to resist or pretend or protect themselves with hard armor. They begin to open. And when they open, inner wisdom begins to lead. There is a great paradox in spiritual life. The more people try to become worthy, the farther they move from what they seek. And when they stop trying, when they allow themselves to rest in the truth of the present moment, they touch it naturally. Not because they give up, but because they stop resisting. Presence is not against you. It stands with the life within you. And life always moves toward order, healing, and balance. When you understand this, you no longer need to negotiate with life. You do not need to prove faith. You do not need to perform goodness. You only need to live honestly and allow order to do its work. When the false image of God dissolves, a new inner space opens, a space of trust. Not blind trust, but trust based on observing how life continues, even when humans do not understand why. In that space, people no longer stand before life as beggars, but as part of the order that is already moving. From this point, the question is no longer how to be accepted, but how to live in harmony. No longer how to avoid punishment, but how to stop hurting oneself with false beliefs. When this shift happens, life becomes lighter, not because there are fewer challenges, but because people no longer carry the added weight of fear and judgment against themselves. Presence does not change. What changes is how humans stand before it. And when that stance becomes softer and more honest, life responds with quiet but precise guidance. Not loud, not dramatic, just a steadier feeling with each step forward. There is a quiet habit that most of us carry into adulthood without noticing. The habit of placing our sense of safety in external things. We place it in a stable relationship, a secure position, a sufficient bank account, a clear plan for the future. We tell ourselves that as long as these things remain, we will be fine. And when one of them begins to shake, the entire feeling of inner safety starts to wobble as well. I do not say this to blame anyone. I say it with deep compassion, because this is what we were taught. We were taught that holding tightly brings peace, that control creates safety, that keeping things intact prevents fear. But what very few people stop to notice is that nothing external is stable enough to carry the weight of an entire human life. Relationships can change. Jobs can end. Money can come and go. Plans can be overturned in a single moment. And when that happens, fear does not come from loss itself, but from realizing that you placed the full weight of your life on something that was never meant to hold it. Peace does not come from keeping everything outside unchanged. Peace comes from knowing what you are standing on, even when everything around you shifts. And this leads us to an important truth. Peace is not found in control. It is found in trust. Trust is not the hope that everything will go your way. Trust is knowing that no matter how things unfold, there is an inner foundation that does not collapse with circumstances. Trust does not remove challenges from life, but it removes the added fear you carry when challenges appear. Many people confuse trust with giving up. They fear that without control, everything will fall into chaos. But look honestly at your life. How many times did you control things tightly, and they still did not turn out as planned? And how many times, when you were too exhausted to keep holding on, a different order quietly appeared? Not because you deserved it more, but because you stopped blocking a flow that was trying to support you. Trust does not mean doing nothing. It means doing what needs to be done from a place that is not panic. When you act from fear, you act to protect yourself. When you act from trust, you act from clarity. The action may look the same, but the source creates very different results. The presence we are speaking about never fails. Not because life is always easy, but because it does not depend on the conditions people usually rely on. It does not collapse when plans fall apart. It does not disappear when you lose direction. It does not withdraw when you are tired or doubtful. It remains doing its work, keeping life moving even when you are not aware of it. When you place your sense of safety in something that does not fail, you begin to live differently. You no longer need to stay on guard all the time. You no longer need to prepare for every worst-case scenario. You no longer need to grip everything tightly out of fear of loss. This does not make you passive. It makes you freer in how you respond. Many people believe that without control, they will lose everything. But in reality, the constant need to control is what exhausts them. It keeps them tense, always bracing for the worst, living as if one moment of looseness will make life collapse. Over time, the mind cannot rest and the heart cannot open. When you begin to trust an inner foundation, you no longer need to prove your worth by keeping everything under control. You allow life space to adjust itself. You do your part, but you no longer believe everything depends entirely on personal effort. And that creates a real lightness, not the lightness of avoidance, but the lightness of placing things where they belong. I want to pause here and invite you to do something very small. Not right now, not publicly, if you do not want to, but if you feel ready, leave a simple sign. You can write a short sentence or simply type the number 1. Not for me, but for yourself, as a quiet way of saying that you are willing to look again at how you have been seeking safety. And if you wish, you can write one short sentence. I am ready to change. Not as a promise of something big, but as an honest acknowledgement that you may be tired of holding everything for so long. Thank you if you do this. Your presence here, even in silence, is already a real step. Trust is not always immediately comfortable. Sometimes it feels like standing on new ground that you are not used to yet. But if you allow yourself to stay long enough, you will realize that this ground is not weak. It is simply different from what you have leaned on before. When you know what in your life does not fail, you no longer have to live in a contracted posture. You begin to open little by little. You do not need to grip the future. You do not need to force timing. You start to walk with a different steadiness, not because you are certain everything will be fine, but because you know that no matter what happens, you do not fall away from the foundation of life. This is a deep shift. It is not loud. It is not dramatic. But it changes how you stand in life. And from that place, many things that once felt stuck begin to open in ways you could never have planned. There is a state that many adults are living in but rarely know how to name. It is not exactly clear suffering and not exactly despair. It feels more like a prolonged sense of being lost. You still wake up each day. You still do what needs to be done. You still fulfill responsibilities. But inside there is a quiet question that keeps repeating. Where am I going? And why does everything feel so heavy? I want to say one thing clearly from the beginning. This feeling of being lost does not mean you chose the wrong path. It also does not mean you have lost something important. In many cases, it simply means you have been moving for too long without stopping to listen to where you are being guided. People often believe that when things are unclear, they need more information, more advice, more planning. But many times what is missing is not knowledge, but connection. Not connection with others, but connection with the inner foundation that is still quietly holding you upright. When life becomes too noisy, guidance does not disappear. It only becomes harder to hear. Like a radio that is still broadcasting clearly, but the frequency has shifted. The sound is still there. You are just no longer tuned in. And what is needed is not to break the radio, but to gently adjust it. Many people blame themselves when they feel lost. They think they should be stronger, more certain, that they should know what they want at this age. But life does not operate by the timelines humans create. There are seasons when you need to move forward, seasons when you need to pause, and seasons when you need to slow down so that a deeper intelligence can catch up. Presence is not in a hurry. It does not push you to decide immediately. It does not shame you for not having answers yet. It understands that some questions cannot be solved by thinking, but only by living through them. In such seasons, uncertainty is not the enemy. It is a sign that you are stepping out of old patterns that no longer fit. I have met many people who say they feel disconnected from themselves. They no longer recognize what once motivated them. The goals that once drove them no longer have the power to move them forward. And they panic thinking they are falling behind. But what they are experiencing is not regression. It is reorganization. When a person is no longer driven by fear or the need to prove something, a gap appears. At first, that gap feels uncomfortable. It feels like being lost. But it is precisely in that space that a more authentic direction can begin to form. If you rush to fill that space with old goals, you may keep moving, but not in the right way. Presence does not ask you to know where you are going. It only invites you to stay with where you are standing. Honest enough to not pretend you are fine when you are not. Trusting enough to not panic because there is no perfect plan yet. There is a big difference between being lost and being guided through unfamiliar territory. When you are lost, you rush. When you are being guided, you learn to slow down. You observe. You listen. You allow what is unclear to exist without labeling it as failure. Much exhaustion does not come from doing too much, but from doing too many things that no longer align with who you are. When you keep living by old expectations, while something inside has changed, the body and mind send signals. Boredom, emptiness, loss of motivation. These signals are not asking you to push harder. They are invitations to adjust direction. Presence does not punish you for going the wrong way. It simply reflects what is no longer aligned. And when you are quiet enough to look honestly, guidance begins to appear in subtle ways. A lighter feeling when you consider one option. A heaviness when you imagine continuing as before. A clarity that does not need reasons. We often wait to be certain before we trust. But life does not require certainty in order to take the next step. It only asks you to be honest about where you are standing. When you stop pretending you already have the answers, a space opens for answers to arrive. There are seasons when you need to release the question, "What should I do next?" and instead ask a gentler one, "What within me needs to be listened to right now?" When you ask this, you move from seeking control to seeking alignment. And that is where presence can begin to work more clearly. You do not need to understand your entire journey to take one more step. You only need enough trust to not abandon yourself during this unclear phase. Presence never asks for a perfect vision. It only asks that you do not turn away from the truth of the present moment. If you are in a season of uncertainty, I want you to know this does not make you less. It does not say you have failed. It says that one chapter is closing and another has not rushed to open yet. The space in between is always the hardest to walk through, and it is also the most honest. In this in-between space, do not force yourself to be positive. Do not force answers. Allow presence to do its work quietly, patiently, without rushing. Because true guidance does not come from panic. It comes from inner consent. When you stop resisting uncertainty, you begin to notice that you were never truly abandoned. There is a current still carrying you, even when you do not know where it leads. And when you stop trying to swim against it, you will feel a different kind of support. Not support built on promises, but on the direct experience of being held steady, even while you do not yet know. I once met a man named Daniel. He did not experience any major crisis. No bankruptcy, no sudden loss, no collapse dramatic enough for others to call it a breakdown. Yet when he sat in front of me, I could see something clearly. He was exhausted from living as if he were an exception to life. Daniel said he always felt like he was standing on the sidelines, that life seemed to flow naturally through others, while for him, everything required effort. He watched others move forward, settle down, appear supported, and wondered why he did not seem to have a place in that flow. He did not say it directly, but deep inside, he believed there was something wrong with him. I did not argue with him. I did not try to convince him that he was special or deserving. I only asked him one simple question. When your heart beats, do you have to command it? When you sleep, who keeps your breath going? When you are injured and your body heals itself, who is working there? Daniel was silent for a long time, because for the first time he realized that he had never truly seen himself as part of a shared order. He had been living as if he had to run everything on his own, as if one moment of rest would make everything collapse, as if he were a small error in a large machine rather than an inseparable part of it. There is a deep belief many people carry, especially those who had to be strong early in life. The belief that they must manage, endure, and carry everything alone. When someone lives with this belief for too long, they begin to feel excluded from the natural support of life. But the truth is, no one is excluded. Some people simply forget that they are included. You are not an exception to life. You are not standing outside the order that moves the universe. You are not a special case that was overlooked. If you are breathing, if your heart is beating, if your body continues to live, whether you understand it or not, then you are inside the same intelligence that keeps the stars in their orbits. What makes people feel separate is not reality, but the way they think about themselves. When you believe you must carry everything alone, you place yourself outside the flow. Not because the flow has no place for you, but because you do not allow yourself to be supported. Presence does not distinguish who is more deserving. It does not choose. It does not favor. It operates as a principle, and principles have no personal exceptions. Water does not decide who gets wet. Light does not choose who it shines on. Life does not evaluate who gets to continue existing moment by moment. It simply is. When you look at life from this perspective, many old questions begin to dissolve. You no longer ask why things seem harder for you than for others. You no longer measure whether you have done enough. You begin to see that the issue is not whether you are supported, but whether you allow yourself to recognize that support. Daniel did not change his life in a single conversation, but something important shifted. He stopped seeing himself as someone outside. From that moment, the way he moved through life began to change. Not because circumstances immediately improved, but because he stopped resisting the idea that he was being held. When you stop believing you are an exception, you no longer need to prove that you belong. You no longer have to strain to be worthy. You begin to live as part of a greater order where every movement has its place. This does not make you passive. It makes you less alone. There is a profound difference between living as an individual thrown into life and living as an expression of life. In the first way, you are always defending. In the second, you begin to cooperate. You do your part, but you do not believe everything depends entirely on you. Presence does not need you to understand everything in order to work. It does not need the correct name. It does not require perfect faith. It only asks that you stop excluding yourself from life. Stop living as if you are the only one not being supported. When you feel tired from trying for too long, it may not be because life is too heavy, but because you are carrying a false belief. The belief that you must do everything alone. When that belief is seen not with judgment, but with truth, the burden begins to lighten. You are not required to be strong all your life. You are not required to understand everything. You are not required to never doubt. You are only invited to remember that you are living within an order that has never stopped supporting you, even when you forget it. When you pause and look at life from this place, something very calm appears. You no longer need to run to keep up with anyone. You no longer compare your pace to others. You begin to walk at your own rhythm, and that rhythm is not outside the greater order. It is simply your part in the same larger music. Presence does not require you to be perfect in order to belong. You belonged from the beginning. And when you stop doubting this, a very different sense of steadiness begins to emerge. Not because everything is clear, but because you no longer feel outside of life. From here, many things can be seen in a different light. Winding paths are no longer proof of failure. They become the way life has brought you to this moment. And when you stop resisting your own story, you begin to read the meaning hidden within it. There is a very common misunderstanding in spiritual life that I want to clarify here. Many people believe that if they try to live correctly, think more positively, and control their emotions better, then peace will arrive as a reward. And when peace does not come, they conclude that they have not done enough, not done it right, or are not worthy yet. But the truth is completely different. Presence does not respond to your effort the way a reward and punishment system responds to behavior. It is not activated when you do well, and it is not withdrawn when you stumble. It does not depend on your mood, it is not affected by your past, and it does not care whether today you feel strong or weak. It was there before you started trying, and it is still there when you are so tired that you can no longer try at all. What makes people feel close to or far from presence is not the level of effort, but the level of resistance. When you argue with reality, when you try to force things to be different, before allowing yourself to rest, you place yourself in tension. In that state, presence is still there, but you cannot feel it like light that is always shining while you turn your back away. Many people confuse alignment with control. They think living in the right direction means holding everything tightly, predicting every possibility, and preparing for every scenario. But alignment does not mean gripping. It means placing yourself where you are not resisting the flow that is already moving. When you stop pulling backward, life naturally begins to carry you with less friction. Alignment does not take away your ability to act. It only changes the source of action. Instead of acting from panic, you begin to act from clarity. Instead of reacting, you respond. Instead of trying to prove, you choose what fits. This difference is not always loud, but it is deep. It changes how you stand in life. Presence does not wait for you to reach an ideal state before it starts working. It has always been working, even in seasons when you believed you had completely failed. Some people only realize this when they look back. They see that even when they were lost, made wrong decisions, or lived in fear, life did not abandon them. It continued to carry them forward, sometimes through detours, but it never let go. When you understand that presence is not conditioned by behavior, a great pressure begins to dissolve. You no longer need to constantly watch yourself. You no longer fear that one wrong thought will make everything collapse. You begin to allow yourself to be human, with uncertainty, exhaustion, and days without answers. This does not make you careless. On the contrary, it makes you more honest. When you are no longer driven by fear of losing support, you can look directly at what needs adjustment without defense. You do not change to avoid punishment. You adjust because you want to live in greater harmony with the order that supports you. True alignment does not come from trying to think correctly, but from stopping the argument with what is. When you accept that the present moment exists, as it does whether comfortable or not, energy leakage stops. You no longer waste strength denying, resisting, or reinterpreting reality to make it hurt less. In that stopping, wisdom begins to speak. There is one important thing I want you to remember. Presence never asks you to be perfect. It only asks that you stop dividing yourself. When you say one thing but believe another inside, when you move in one direction while your heart pulls another way, friction is created. That friction is what exhausts you, not because life is hard, but because you are living in inner conflict. When you begin to live with more coherence, not by forcing positivity, but by being honest about what is happening inside, lightness appears. Fear may still exist, but it does not lead. Doubt may still appear, but it does not make decisions. You begin to choose from a deeper place that is not shaken by every small change. Presence does not need to be named. It does not require you to understand the mechanism. It only asks that you do not block the path. Like electricity, it does not need persuasion to flow, but the circuit must be open. When you are no longer split inside, when thoughts, emotions, and actions are not pulling in three directions, flow becomes smooth. And when flow is smooth, many things that felt stuck begin to open on their own. You can recognize alignment through very simple signs. You no longer need to convince yourself that this is the right choice. You feel a quietness inside when you consider it. Not excitement, not drama, just a sense of fit. And things that are no longer right begin to feel heavy, even if the mind can list many reasonable arguments. Presence does not force you onto a specific path. It only shows you when you are moving against yourself. And when you pause long enough to listen, you do not need external confirmation. You know, not by reasoning, but by a clear inner steadiness. Many people are used to pushing themselves forward even when they are empty inside. They fear that if they stop, they will fall behind or be left out. But presence does not measure life by speed. It measures by harmony. And sometimes the bravest thing is not to move forward, but to pause long enough to realign. When you allow yourself to realign, you do not lose time. You save a great amount of energy that was being wasted resisting yourself. From that place, action becomes more precise. Not more, but more accurate. Not loud, but more sustainable. Presence does not promise that life will always be easy, but it assures that you never face anything alone. When you stop resisting the flow, you begin to feel the support that has always been there, not as a miracle, but as a solid reality. And when you live from this alignment, you no longer need to constantly search for signs that you are on the right path. How you feel inside as you walk is already the sign. Not excitement, but the absence of inner division. That is how you know you are in the right place, not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer fighting yourself. There is a point that every inner journey reaches sooner or later, a moment when you realize you cannot stand in two places at the same time. You cannot ask for clarity while letting worry lead the way. You cannot long for peace while using fear as the measure for every decision. Not because you are weak, but because life moves through coherence. And coherence asks for a choice. Many people believe they are trusting when in fact they are only hoping. Hoping that things will be fine as long as they control enough. Hoping that their worry is reasonable, necessary, and a sign of responsibility. But hope mixed with fear does not create trust. It creates a suspended state where the mind keeps arguing with itself. Trust in its deepest sense is not a pleasant feeling. It is not self-reassurance. It is an inner decision. A decision that there is an intelligence greater than your fear. A decision that you will not let worst-case scenarios become the compass for your life. A decision that you can walk forward without absolute guarantees. Fear always speaks loudly. It offers reasons. It lists risks. It repeats the past. It convinces you that if you do not listen, you will be in danger. And so many people mistake fear for wisdom. But true wisdom does not make you contract. It makes you clear. It does not rush you into action. It gives you a sense of steadiness, even when the next step is unknown. When fear is in control, life becomes a chain of reactions. You react to bad news. You react to other people's looks. You react to possibilities that have not happened. And in that chain of reactions, you rarely pause long enough to ask what is truly guiding you. Trust does not deny the presence of fear. It simply refuses to give fear leadership. You may still feel worried. You may still feel uneasy. But you no longer allow those feelings to decide direction. You listen to them as signals, not as commands. There is a subtle but crucial difference between listening to fear and following fear. When you listen, you learn what needs attention. When you follow, you hand your life over to it. Trust begins with knowing the difference. Many people live as if they must wait until fear disappears before they can trust. But that rarely happens. Trust does not arrive after fear is gone. Trust arrives when you choose not to place fear at the center anymore. And that choice, repeated enough times, is what slowly takes fear out of power. Presence does not ask you to be brave in a heroic way. It only asks you to be honest. Honest that you are afraid. Honest that you do not know everything. And honest that even so you are willing not to let fear decide your entire life. That honesty creates a new space where trust can begin to grow. When you choose trust, you are not choosing a specific outcome. You are choosing a foundation. You are choosing to stand on what does not change instead of clinging to situations that always do. From that foundation, your actions take on a different quality. Less defensive, less proving, less rushed. Trust does not make decisions easy, but it makes them clear. You no longer have to keep asking, is this safe? You begin to ask a deeper question. Is this aligned? And that alignment does not come from calculation, but from the quiet inside when you think of it. There will be moments when you see clearly that a certain path is no longer right, even if it once made sense. And moments when you feel drawn toward something new, even though the mind has not caught up. Trust means respecting those signals not because they are comfortable, but because they are true. Presence does not force you to choose immediately, but it does not allow endless avoidance. There comes a time when not choosing is also a choice. And often, it is the choice of fear. Trust invites you to step out of that middle ground, not with a leap, but with one small, honest step. I want to pause here and ask you a question, not for you to answer me, but to listen within. In your recent decisions, what has been leading the way? Fear or trust? If you look honestly, you will see the answer, not in words, but in how you feel as you move. If you are listening this far, I want to thank you. Not because you chose correctly, but because you were willing to look directly at this question. Many people live their whole lives without ever stopping to ask what is truly guiding them. The fact that you paused and listened is already a deep step. Trust is not a one-time choice. It is a daily practice. Each day you are invited again to choose where you stand, in reaction or in presence, in defense or in cooperation, in fear or in trust in a greater order that is working even when you cannot see clearly. And the most important thing I want you to remember is this. You do not need to defeat fear in order to trust. You only need to stop letting it lead. When you do that, even in one small decision, you will begin to feel a very different kind of steadiness. Not because everything is safe, but because you are no longer being pulled by what is not truly you. There is a truth many people avoid looking at directly, not because it is hard to understand, but because it asks for deep honesty. We often speak beautifully about faith, letting go, and trust, while inside we are living with quiet agreements with fear. We say we believe, yet we act as if everything will fall apart if we do not control it. That inner contradiction is what exhausts us. The law of the mind does not respond to words. It responds to inner agreement. It does not listen to what you declare. It reflects what you actually believe. And real belief is not found in language, but in where you place your sense of safety. If you say you trust presence, but every decision is made from fear of loss, then fear is what is truly leading. Many people wonder why they try so hard, pray so much, think positively so often, yet life does not move. They assume they lack discipline, faith, or worthiness. But many times the issue is not a lack of effort. It is inner division. One part wants to trust, while another holds fear tightly as a backup plan. You cannot move forward while pulling the handbrake. You cannot say you are letting go while quietly preparing for the worst, as if it were certain. Life does not judge you for this. It simply reflects the state you are holding. And a divided state always creates friction, delay, and fatigue. When I speak of inner agreement, I do not mean forcing yourself to believe something unreal. I mean honestly seeing the beliefs that quietly control you. These beliefs are rarely spoken aloud. They hide in the phrase, "what if?" They hide in the habit of always preparing for the worst. They hide in the hesitation to step fully forward for fear of disappointment. Inner agreement does not require instant perfection. It simply invites you to stop saying one thing and living another. When you say you want peace, but continue to feed resentment, worry, or comparison, you are sending mixed signals. And the law of the mind, like a precise mirror, reflects only what is truly present. This is not punishment. It is accuracy. The law does not punish you for being afraid. It simply cannot bring peace while fear is still your foundation. When you understand this, you stop blaming yourself. You no longer feel abandoned or unfairly tested. You begin to see that every stagnation is pointing to where inner realignment is needed. There is great relief in realizing you do not need to convince life. You do not need to beg the law to work in your favor. You only need to become more consistent with how you truly want to live. And that consistency does not come from forced positivity, but from releasing beliefs that no longer serve you. Many people fear looking directly at these beliefs because they think letting go of fear will remove safety. But the opposite is true. Fear does not protect you. It keeps you in prolonged defense. And living in defense for too long disconnects you from true guidance. When you begin to align inwardly, not through vows, but by living more consistently with what you say, you believe energy gathers. You stop leaking strength through inner conflict. You no longer perform strength outwardly while doubting inside. You become simpler, and that simplicity carries a quiet power. Presence does not ask for blind belief. It asks for honesty. Honesty about where you place your safety. Honesty about what you truly rely on when things become uncertain. When you are honest enough to see this, you have already begun to step out of inner division. From there, change begins not because you try harder, but because you stop resisting yourself. Life responds to this new coherence with small but real movements. A lighter feeling when considering a decision. Less tension when facing uncertainty. A quiet trust that you no longer need to prepare for every imagined disaster. Inner agreement is not a destination. It is an ongoing practice. Each day you are invited to notice what you say and how you live. Each time you choose to live closer to inner truth, another knot loosens. As those knots loosen, flow becomes smoother. Not because life suddenly favors you, but because you are no longer blocking your own path. Within that flow, you begin to sense a different kind of strength. Not the strength of control, but the strength of alignment. There is a moment that most people eventually face whether they name it or not. The moment you realize you have been gripping a rope for a very long time. That rope might be control plans, an image of who you should be, or a belief about how things must go for you to feel safe. And the paradox is that the very rope you think is holding you steady is what has been tiring your hands the most. At this stage, trust is no longer a beautiful idea. It becomes a very concrete and very real choice. To let go or to keep straining. What makes this choice difficult is not lack of understanding, but familiarity. You have held on for so long that you no longer remember what it feels like to release. I want to be clear about this. Letting go is not abandoning responsibility. Letting go is releasing the illusion that you must carry everything alone for life to not collapse. There is a big difference between doing your part and trying to hold the order of the universe on your personal shoulders. The second always leads to exhaustion. When you live in control for too long, your nervous system adapts to tension. Even when nothing is obviously wrong inside you, remain on guard. And when someone speaks to you about trust or surrender, you do not feel relief. You feel fear. Not because it is wrong, but because it touches the place where control became your survival strategy. Presence does not ask you to drop everything at once. It does not ask you to jump off a cliff. It only invites you to loosen your grip. Just a little. Enough to notice that when you do not hold so tightly, life does not immediately fall apart. Enough to see that another order is already at work, one that does not depend on your constant strain. Letting go is not an act of weakness. It is an act of deep courage. The courage to stop playing the controller. The courage to admit that you are tired. The courage to allow a greater intelligence to handle what is beyond the reach of the ego. Many people believe that if they let go, they will lose direction. But often, the opposite is true. When blind control softens, you begin to sense subtle guidance. Not through loud commands, but through gentle signals. A calmer feeling when you pause. More clarity when you say no. More peace when you do not need to explain everything. Presence is not in a hurry. It does not push you to prove that you trust enough. It only observes whether you are willing to cooperate. And cooperation, in the language of life, often begins with not interfering. There is a quiet fear that often appears when you stand at the edge of letting go. The fear that if you stop straining, you will become useless, fall behind, or lose value. But that fear comes from an old belief, the belief that your worth depends on how well you control. When that belief is seen not with judgment but with truth, it begins to lose power. When you let go of control, you do not disappear. You become more precise. You do not do less. You do what is right. You do not react impulsively. You respond from a steadier place. And that gives your actions a different weight. Not loud, not dramatic, but grounded. I want to pause here and invite you to do something very small, if it feels right. No long explanation. No justification. Just a simple sign. You can leave a very short comment, even just the number 1, as a way of saying you are here and you are willing to loosen the rope you have held for too long. Or if you want, you can write one simple sentence. I am ready to change. Not as a promise to let go of everything today, only as an acknowledgement that maybe you do not need to strain the way you used to. Thank you if you do this. Your presence, even in silence, is already part of this shift. Letting go does not take your power away. It returns power to its proper place. Instead of scattering your energy, trying to control what cannot be controlled, your energy comes back to what you can actually choose. How you respond, how you listen, how you stand in this moment. Presence does not need you to force belief. It only asks that you stop resisting. When you loosen enough to stop arguing with life, you begin to feel a very different kind of support. Not like a miracle, but like a solid ground that has always been there waiting for you to stop gripping so you can finally step onto it. There is a very subtle confusion that many people carry for years without realizing it. The confusion between control and clarity. Many believe that if they do not control tightly enough, life will fall into chaos. They believe that if they do not plan ahead, manage every detail, and stay constantly alert, everything will collapse. But that belief does not come from truth. It comes from fear that has become a habit. Control is not a sign of wisdom. It is often a sign of a nervous system that has learned to protect itself too much. When someone lives for a long time in strain, they begin to call that tension responsibility. They call worry carefulness. They call control maturity. But the body is not fooled. The body knows when you are living in order and when you are living in defense. Clarity does not tense you. It settles you, not because everything is resolved, but because you are no longer trying to hold a role that is not yours. When you are clear, you do not need to control every detail. You know what is yours to do and what is not. That distinction is the true sign of wisdom. Control always comes with tension. You may be so used to it that you no longer notice. But if you look honestly, you will see that whenever you try to keep everything within reach, you are not at ease inside. You stay on guard. You prepare for the worst. You live as if loosening even slightly would bring danger. Lived long enough this way, people do not only get tired, they lose the ability to listen. Presence does not operate through control. It operates through order. And order does not need you to supervise every movement. Order knows how to balance itself. It knows when to open and when to close, when to move and when to stop. But to sense that order, you must stop interfering with your fear. Many people say they are afraid to let go because they fear losing control. But what they truly fear is uncertainty, not knowing in advance, being in a moment without a backup plan. Yet life was never designed for you to know everything beforehand. If you must know before you dare to live, you will remain stuck in defense. Clarity does not require knowing everything. It only asks that you know where you are. When you know where you stand, you do not need to control the road ahead. You only need to step in a way that fits the ground beneath you. And that step, when not pushed by fear, becomes naturally more accurate. Emmet Fox pointed out something important long ago. Humans were not created to carry the entire universe. They were created to cooperate with the order that runs the universe. When you try to control everything, you unconsciously place yourself in a role you were never meant to hold. That always leads to exhaustion, confusion, and loss of direction. Control makes you believe everything depends on you. Clarity helps you see that many things do not. Accepting this does not weaken you, it lightens you. When you stop holding what is not yours, your energy returns to what you can truly choose. How you respond, how you listen, how you say yes or no. Many fear that without control, they will become passive, but the opposite is true. Control creates reaction. You react to fear, to possible loss, to imagined scenarios. Clarity allows response, and response comes from a calmer, deeper place. When you are clear, you do not do more. You do what is right. You do not speak more. You speak at the right time. You do not need to prove knowledge. You only need enough stillness to recognize what needs to be done. This sounds simple, but it requires letting go of a very old habit. The belief that tension is necessary for life, not to fall apart. Presence is never tense. It is not rushed. It is not startled by change. It does not panic when plans collapse. If you live in prolonged tension, that is not a sign of high responsibility. It is a sign you are out of alignment with natural order. Your body is trying to tell you that. Some people are afraid to stop because they think everything will catch up with them. But what usually happens when you stop is not collapse. Truth begins to speak. You begin to see how tired you are, how much unnecessary weight you have been carrying. That seeing, though uncomfortable at first, is the beginning of real clarity. Clarity is not an emotional high. It is not excitement or certainty. It is often ordinary, quiet, undramatic. But because it is undramatic, it lasts. You do not need constant reassurance. You do not need to convince yourself it is right. You simply know. And that knowing needs no explanation. Control always needs reasons. It needs defense. It needs justification. If you constantly have to explain why you are doing something, you may be acting from defense. Clarity needs no protection. It stands on its own. You do not need many words to prove it. You only need to live it. When you learn to distinguish control from clarity, many things in life begin to look different. You realize that what you once called carefulness was fear, and what you once called giving up was actually deep clarity. Presence does not ask you to stop acting. It asks you to stop acting from panic. When action comes from clarity, it carries a different quality. It is not rushed, not rigid, not defensive, and because of that, it is often more effective even if it looks simpler. A deep calm appears when you stop trying to control outcomes. You do your part with care, but you no longer tie your worth to whether results match expectations. You stop seeing outcomes as judgments of who you are. From there, life begins to feel lighter. Clarity does not remove responsibility. It places responsibility where it belongs. Instead of being responsible for everything, you are responsible for how you show up, how you speak, how you choose. This is the only kind of responsibility humans can truly carry without exhaustion. When you live from this clarity, many decisions that once drained you become simpler. Not because there are fewer options, but because fear is no longer at the table. You do not need endless opinions. You stop asking if you are wrong. You begin to trust the quiet inside when you stand before a choice. Presence does not promise you will never be wrong, but it assures that you will not wander too far if you know how to return. Returning here does not mean returning to an idea. It means returning to a state without tension, without defense, quiet enough to hear. If you are tired from controlling for too long, you do not need to throw everything away to live differently. You only need to pause long enough to notice where you are tight. When you see that without judgment, loosening begins naturally. Clarity does not arrive when you chase it. It arrives when you stop interfering, when you stop forcing yourself to know, when you stop straining to hold. In that space, presence begins to do its work quietly, precisely, without noise. There is a very quiet yet decisive shift that happens when people stop seeking safety through control and begin to find it in presence. This shift is not loud. There is no clear marker where you can point and say everything changed here. But if you pay attention, you will notice that the way you respond to life begins to change. Before, whenever something did not go as expected, your mind rushed to find causes, find faults, find fixes. You thought quickly, spoke quickly, decided quickly, not from clarity, but from fear. Fear that if you did not act immediately, everything would slip out of control. But when presence becomes your anchor, you are no longer rushed. Not because you are indifferent, but because you are no longer driven by panic. A very different kind of strength appears when you stop reacting. It is not the strength of doing more, but the strength of not being pulled around. When you are no longer dragged by every small fluctuation, you begin to see more clearly what truly matters and what is only noise. Many people live in exhaustion not because they lack energy, but because their energy is scattered. They let other people's opinions pull them. They let worry about the future pull them. They let old memories pull them. And while being pulled in so many directions, they are rarely fully present where they are. Presence does not pull you anywhere. It keeps you here. And that is what makes you strong. When you stay with the present moment, not through forcing, but through allowing, a different intelligence begins to operate. You do not need to analyze everything to know what to do next. You begin to notice that certain actions arise naturally when you stop interfering. A call that needs to be made, a conversation that needs to end, a decision that needs to wait. Not because of fear, but because it is not ready yet. Presence does not rush you into action. It also does not trap you in inertia. It gives you a sense of timing, and that sense of timing does not come from thinking but from inner synchronization. When your thoughts, emotions, and body are no longer pulling in different directions, you begin to feel the rhythm of life. Some people ask how they can know they are moving in the right direction. I rarely answer with specific advice. I invite them to notice one thing. When you think of that choice, do you feel contraction inside or a quiet openness? Presence often comes with openness. Not excitement, but the absence of defense. When you have lived too long in defense, you become used to contraction. Even without real threat, your body stays guarded. And in that state, guidance is hard to sense because every signal is filtered through fear. Presence does something simple yet profound. It brings you back to a non-contracted state. From there, clarity becomes possible. Many believe that to be aware, they must constantly monitor, constantly observe, constantly stay alert. But presence is not a tense effort. It is like conscious relaxation. You are not drifting unconsciously, and you are not gripping to control. You are in between. And in that space, life begins to speak in a way you can hear. When you are present, you do not rush to assign meaning to everything. You allow experience before interpretation. You allow feeling before analysis. This matters because much suffering comes from assigning meaning before we have truly lived through the experience. Presence does not remove pain immediately, but it changes how you carry it. You stop resisting it. You stop repeating its story. You let it move through you. When pain is not held in place by resistance, it often dissolves faster than you expect. Not because you are stronger, but because you stop thickening it with fear. A quiet maturity appears when you stop demanding that life explain everything to you. You accept that some seasons come without clear answers. You do not see that as failure, but as part of the rhythm. When you stop rushing for conclusions, you stop forcing yourself to know ahead of time. In not knowing, a real form of trust begins to grow. Presence does not promise you will always understand why things happen. It gives you steadiness to stay with what you do not yet understand. That ability to stay is a sign of inner strength, not the strength of quick resolution, but the strength of not running from uncertainty. As you begin to live from presence, many conflicts that once drained you lose their weight. Not because others change, but because you are no longer pulled into old reactions. You no longer need to win every argument or prove you are right. You begin choosing peace without feeling diminished. This does not weaken you. It clarifies where your energy truly belongs. When you stop spending strength on unnecessary battles, that energy naturally flows to what matters. Work, family, creativity, care for yourself. Presence also changes how you experience time. You no longer feel constantly behind or chasing. You begin to live at your own pace. And that pace, when not forced, often aligns naturally with the larger rhythm of life. A deep lightness appears when you stop living as if every moment were a test. You stop constantly evaluating yourself. You stop asking if you have done enough. You begin treating yourself with kindness. That kindness does not make you lazy. It makes you resilient. Presence is not a special state that only appears when everything is fine. It is a foundation you can touch, even when things are messy. In fact, it is often clearest when things fall apart because familiar strategies stop working and you are invited back to what is most basic. How you breathe, how you stand, how you stay. When you begin living from this foundation, you no longer seek absolute certainty. You know life does not work that way. But you also stop living in constant unease. You have an anchor that does not depend on circumstances. From that anchor, you can face whatever comes, not with strain, but with presence. Presence does not make you special. It makes you real. And it is from that reality that lasting strength is born. Not the strength to fight life, but the strength to walk with life without losing yourself. If you have stayed with me this far, you may already sense something subtle shifting. Not a big emotion, just less tension. Less rush. A feeling that maybe you do not need to try so hard to earn rest. From here, we will continue deeper into how presence heals the cracks you have carried for a long time, not by fixing them, but by bringing light back to places you once believed were broken. There are inner cracks that no one can see from the outside. They are not loud. They do not bleed. They do not stop you immediately. Yet they quietly shape the way you love, the way you work, the way you trust, and the way you stand before life. These cracks often form not from one great event, but from many moments when you had to endure alone, unseen, unsupported, not allowed to be weak. Many people carry these cracks and call them personality. They say they are tough, independent, not needing anyone. But behind those words, there is often another story. A story of once wanting to lean on someone but having no place to do so. Of needing to be heard but having to stay silent. Of hoping then learning to manage alone. Presence does not heal by fixing these cracks. It does not try to patch you into an ideal image of wholeness. It does something deeper. It brings light back. And light, when it enters the right place, does not force anything. It simply allows truth to appear. Many people are afraid to look at their inner cracks because they think touching them will make everything fall apart. But the truth is often the opposite. What truly hurts is not the crack itself, but keeping it in the dark for too long. When something is allowed to be seen, it begins to lose its power. Not because it disappears, but because you no longer have to carry it alone. Presence does not ask why you are the way you are. It does not analyze. It does not search for blame. It simply stays quiet enough that you no longer need to defend yourself. And in that undefended space, many things that were tightly held begin to soften naturally. Not in a dramatic way, but in a very human way. Some memories do not need to be recalled in clear images to be healed. They only need to be felt in a safe environment. When you allow yourself to stay with the sensation instead of immediately explaining or escaping, you are doing something very important. You are allowing life to complete a movement that was interrupted long ago. Many people learned how to live without fully feeling. They separated from emotion to avoid pain. But that separation does not only block pain, it also blocks joy, connection, and trust. Presence does not force you to feel everything at once. It simply creates the conditions for feeling to return safely. When the light of presence touches a crack, the first thing you may feel is not comfort. It may be sadness. It may be fatigue. It may be a fragile feeling you learn to avoid. What matters is that you are no longer alone with it. There is a foundation strong enough to hold you, so you are not overwhelmed when emotion rises. Healing does not always look like a breakthrough moment. Often it looks like a gentle softening. You react more slowly. You blame yourself less quickly. You stop forcing yourself to be fine right away. And these small shifts over time create a profound change in how you live. There is a common misunderstanding that healing means going back to the past and fixing everything. But presence does not ask you to relive pain. It invites you to bring the light of the present to the places where the past is still influencing you. When you stand firmly in the present, the past no longer has the power to pull you down. It becomes part of the story, not the one in control. Many people believe they have moved on because they no longer think about the past. But ignoring is not the same as healing. What is not healed continues to show up in your reactions and your defenses and the limits you set to avoid being hurt again. Presence does not force confrontation. It waits patiently until you feel safe enough to stop running. When you feel safe, you begin to see that cracks are not proof of being broken. They are proof that you lived, that you felt, that you endured. And often the very places that once fractured become the places where you gain depth, compassion, and the ability to understand others without judgment. Presence does not make you invulnerable. It makes you no longer afraid of vulnerability. And when fear fades, you stop closing yourself off. You stop building walls that are too high. You begin to reconnect not recklessly, but with awareness and softness. A quiet healing happens when you stop asking why this happened to me and begin asking what within me needs to be heard. The first question often leads to dead ends. The second opens guidance. Life does not always explain reasons, but it always points toward adjustment. When you are in presence, you do not need to force forgiveness to heal. If forgiveness comes, it comes naturally as a result of no longer being bound to old pain. It does not arise from moral pressure. It arises from the lightness inside when you no longer have to protect the wound. Healing does not erase what happened. It changes your position toward what happened. You no longer live inside it. You stand beside it, seeing it through the light of the present. From there, you are no longer defined by what once hurt you. I want to pause here and ask you a very honest question, not for you to answer me, but to listen within. Is there a crack in you that you have hidden for a long time, not because it hurts too much, but because you fear that looking at it would make you weak? And if today you did not need to be strong anymore, what in you is asking to be touched by light? If you are listening this far, thank you. Not because you understood everything, but because you stayed with something that is not easy. Your presence here with yourself is already part of the healing. No further effort is required. Presence does not promise that every crack will disappear, but it assures that no crack needs to remain in the dark forever. And when light has touched it, you no longer have to be afraid of yourself. From here we move to a very important place, a place where you begin to live, not only as someone being healed, but as someone ready to walk with their truth, without hiding, without straining, without needing to prove. When a person has moved through enough layers of defense, enough attempts to fix themselves, enough effort to be okay, a very quiet moment appears. Not a moment of victory, not a moment of understanding everything, but a moment where you no longer want to run, not from emotion, not from truth, not from yourself. At this stage, many are surprised to realize that what they were seeking all along was not a new version of themselves, but permission to live as the true version that was always there. Without hiding, without straining, without performing strength beyond reality. Presence does not take you to a spiritual peak. It brings you back to the ground, back to the simple truth that you are human, and being human does not require perfection to live a meaningful life. When you stop trying to become an ideal image, you begin to show up more fully in real life. There is a very quiet maturity that appears when you no longer feel the need to explain yourself to everyone. Not because you close off, but because you stand more firmly inside. When you are grounded, you do not need to convince. You do not need to prove. You do not need to defend every decision against the doubts of others. Presence makes you calm enough to hear both praise and criticism without being carried away. You no longer let praise define your worth. You no longer let criticism shake your foundation. You begin to live from a deeper place, where self-respect does not depend on constant approval from outside. Many people are afraid to live truthfully because they believe that, without constant effort, they will fall behind. But living truthfully does not mean stopping growth. It means growing from the right place. When you stop spending energy maintaining an image, that energy naturally flows into learning, creating, and contributing in a more natural way. There is a big difference between self-improvement and constantly feeling not enough. Presence helps you see that difference. You can still learn, still change, still adjust, but you no longer do it from lack. You do it from respect for yourself. That respect makes growth far more sustainable. When you begin living from your truth, the relationships around you begin to change. Not because you force others to understand you, but because you stop performing. Some relationships may fall away, others deepen. And either way, you no longer see this change as failure. You understand that not everyone can walk with you when you stop playing old roles. Presence does not protect you from loss, but it keeps you from losing yourself within loss. When you no longer live to please, every change stops being a threat to your identity. It becomes a natural movement of life. There is a real freedom when you stop living by standards you never consciously chose. When you stop trying to meet invisible expectations, when you allow yourself to live at your own pace, even if it does not match the crowd. This freedom is quiet, but deep. Many think living truthfully means saying everything out loud. But living truthfully first means not lying to yourself, not staying in situations that make you shrink, not convincing yourself you are fine when inside you are empty. Presence helps you notice these moments earlier and respond with kindness toward yourself. When you live from presence, you no longer place your entire value on outcomes. You work with care, but you do not let results define who you are. You understand that some things are beyond your control, and that does not diminish you. It only reminds you that you are living within a larger order than the personal self. A deep calm appears when you stop seeing life as a series of tests you must pass to be accepted. You begin to live as part of life, not as someone asking permission to exist. From that place, much old tension naturally dissolves. Presence does not make you numb. It makes you more sensitive, but without being swept away. You can feel sadness without collapsing, joy without clinging, love without losing yourself. That is the sign of inner strength placed in the right place. When you live truthfully, you are no longer afraid of being seen. Not because you have no weaknesses, but because you no longer use them to attack yourself. You understand that vulnerability is not the opposite of strength. It is part of human strength. When you allow that, you become easier to connect with, not through neediness, but through genuine presence. Presence does not make you special. It makes you whole with yourself. When you are whole inside, you no longer need to take from others to fill gaps. You give from abundance, not from lack. There is a clear ripeness when you stop asking, "Who should I become?" and begin asking, "Am I living in alignment with what I know to be true?" The second question does not create pressure. It creates direction. It does not demand perfection. It only invites honesty. When you are honest with yourself, many decisions become simpler. Not easier, but simpler. You no longer need to circle around. You no longer need to compromise with what makes you smaller. You choose from a quieter place, and because of that, you carry less regret. Presence does not remove difficulty from life, but it removes the added weight of having to be someone else. When that weight is set down, you begin to walk lighter. Not because the path is smoother, but because you are no longer dragging old layers of defense. At this stage, you begin to understand that peace is not a state you achieve, but a way you stand in life. You can stand in uncertainty with calm, in change with trust, in yourself without armor. And when you stand this way, you are ready for the final part of this journey, not as an ending, but as a new beginning, where you are not only healing, not only being guided, but beginning to live as someone who knows they are supported, and therefore no longer needs to live in fear. I want to say this to you as if I was sitting across from you in a quiet room with no rush and nothing to prove. After everything we have walked through together, there is a very simple truth I have learned over my lifetime. Peace does not arrive when life stops challenging you. Peace arrives when you stop believing that challenge means you have been abandoned. I have seen many people search for God as if searching for something far away. They look in teachings, in rituals, in efforts to become better. The more they search, the more tired they become. Not because what they seek is unreal, but because they are looking in the wrong direction. The presence I speak of has never been outside of you. It has never stood at the end of a road waiting for you to be worthy enough to appear. It has been here from the beginning, quietly supporting every breath you never had to ask for. There was a time in my life when I realized that what causes human suffering is not circumstance, but the belief that we must face circumstance alone. When you believe you are alone, every burden feels heavier than it needs to be. But when you remember that there is a greater order working with you, not against you, even difficult seasons no longer carry the same weight. I am not saying life will become easy. I have never promised that. But I am saying you do not need to strain to live. You do not need to constantly prove that you are strong enough, good enough, worthy enough to be supported. Support does not come because you do things right. It comes because support is the nature of life itself. For a long time, people were taught that they must earn peace, that they must fix themselves, improve themselves, purify themselves before they are allowed to rest. That teaching places peace too far away. And when peace always lives in the future, the present becomes something to endure. I have learned that peace is not a reward. It is a foundation. And when you stand on that foundation, everything else begins to fall into place. I have seen people who seem to lose everything discover a deeper steadiness than ever before. Not because they defeated circumstance, but because they stopped resisting reality. They stopped asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and began asking, "What in me needs to adjust to live in greater harmony?" That question opened guidance. Presence does not explain everything to you. It does not hand you a detailed map of the future. But it gives you something far more important, a stable ground. When you have that ground, you no longer need to know every step ahead. You only need to take the next step with honesty and trust. I want you to understand this clearly. You are not an unfinished project. You are not a person who must be repaired before being loved. You are not an exception forgotten by life. If you are breathing, if your heart is beating, if you are here, you are already within the same order that sustains everything. There will be days when you forget this. There will be moments when fear returns familiar and old. I am not asking you to push it away. I am only inviting you to remember that fear is not a trustworthy guide. It is simply a signal that you have momentarily stepped away from your ground. And the moment you notice that you can return, no ritual required, no punishment, just a moment of remembering. I have seen that life begins to change, not when people pray harder, but when they agree more deeply. Agree that they do not need to control the entire flow. Agree that there are things they do not know and that this does not make them less. Agree that life is more intelligent than their fear. When this agreement appears, many things naturally rearrange themselves. You no longer force yourself down paths that no longer fit. You no longer stay in roles that make you smaller. You begin to walk with a very different calm. Not calm because everything is resolved, but calm because you are no longer fighting yourself. I want you to remember that presence is not something you touch only in rare, quiet moments. It is the ground you are standing on every day, even when you are busy, tired, or doubtful. You do not need to create it. You only need to stop forgetting it. When you live from this foundation, you begin to see that peace is not the absence of problems. It is steadiness when problems arise. Meaning is not a single great answer for your entire life. It is the sense that how you are living does not betray who you truly are. Direction is not knowing exactly where you will be in 10 years. It is knowing where you are standing now and what is leading you. I do not know what the road ahead will look like for you, but I know this. If you walk with presence as your ground, you will not be lost for long. You may turn the wrong way. You may pause. You may take a longer route, but you will not lose yourself. And that matters most. Presence never fails. Not because life is always favorable, but because it is not dependent on conditions. It does not come and go. It does not grow stronger when you are good and weaker when you are tired. It simply remains patient, steady, waiting for you to stop arguing with it. If you have listened this far, I want to say to you what I have said to many people in their most important moments. You do not need to become someone else. You only need to return. Return to what has always kept you alive, even when you did not believe. When you live from that place, very naturally, very quietly, your life begins to reflect the steadiness within. Not through miracles, but through alignment. Not through drama, but through a peace deep enough for you to know you are being guided even when the whole path is not yet visible. That is when you stop searching for presence. You live from it, and from there, even the most ordinary moments carry a quiet strength.